The Grand Summit ballroom pulsed with a low, electric hum of unchecked power, but beneath the chandelier light, a silent storm was brewing. Ilara moved through the room, her movements precise. Her faded gray uniform a beacon of invisibility amidst a sea of bespoke suits and sparkling diamonds. Her heart was an anchor, heavy from the moment she woke, when a text, cold, blunt, and wholly without affection, had landed on her screen. "Your father's disappointed. You're still doing this." No greeting, no concern, just the stinging confirmation that she remained a failure in the eyes of the Beaumont family. That weight clung to her now, heavy as the silver tray balanced in her hand, even as the powerful men and women around her debated fortunes. She was 23, skilled, determined, yet reduced to a mere pair of hands by the very people whose halls of marble she had been raised to inherit. Just then, a sudden, sharp wave of tension cut the air. The doors swung inward, and the legendary Korean magnate, Mr. Kim, entered. He spoke, not in the expected English of high finance, but in a rapid, complex stream of Korean, unleashing terms of mergers and assets that immediately left every high-powered guest staring blankly, utterly lost. As the magnate's face hardened into a deep frown of frustration, the entire room held its collective breath. And in that terrifying silence, the silent attendant, who was supposed to simply disappear, slowly lowered her head, preparing to speak. The Grand Summit Ballroom was the zenith of the city's opulent the Zenith Plaza, a gleaming space where wealth felt less earned and more inherited. The hotel manager, Brenda, a wiry woman whose mouth was habitually pinched, stared at Ilara as she entered, carrying a tray heavy with vintage wine. "Walk slowly. Don't spill on the $1,000,000 carpet," Brenda hissed, her tone accusatory despite Ilara's perfect balance. Ilara simply bowed her head, maintaining the silence that had become her most reliable defense. She had learned to become a shadow, a technique mastered long ago in childhood when she realized that being a quiet little thing meant she was overlooked, and now overlooked meant safe. She wore her plain face and her soft black hair pulled back like armor. Her family's disappointment was a constant pressure, a low, oppressive drone that followed her from the marble halls of her upbringing to the bustling service hallways of this coastal metropolis. They called her job beneath her, unable to comprehend why she, a graduate of the prestigious Hanyang Institute, would choose to serve rather than command. As she moved through the room, pouring, adjusting, and receding, she was scrutinized. A woman in a sleek red dress, her nails painted to match, tracked Ilara with an amused, predatory gaze. "You're holding that tray like it's a lifeline," the socialite, Ms. Verona, declared, her voice dripping with cruel amusement. The people around her tittered, their eyes dropping dismissively to Ilara's worn service shoes. "Don't they train you to at least look professional?" Ms. Verona added, raising an eyebrow, waiting for the expected shame. Ilara's fingers tightened on the edge of the tray, but her face remained impassive. She set a glass down with precision. She would not react. Her silence, she knew, was always louder than their laughter. A man in a crisp tuxedo, the corporate director, Mr. Vance, leaned close as she refilled his glass, his sharp cologne overpowering the scent of the wine. "You don't belong here, sweetheart," he murmured, his voice low and meant only for her. "This is for players, not cleaners." He smirked, adjusting his cufflinks, clearly expecting her to wilt or blush. Ilara paused mid-pour, the wine bottle steady. She met his eyes, calm, piercing, and entirely unyielding. "I'm working," she said. Her voice was soft, yet carried a specific gravity that made him lean back, his smirk momentarily faltering. She finished the pour, turned, and walked away, leaving his expensive cufflinks glinting uselessly in the opulent light. Her immediate superior, Brenda, the regional coordinator, snapped at her from the corner. "Hey you!" Brenda leaned in, her breath sharp with mint gum. "Your uniform's wrinkled. Embarrassing. Fix it before you shame us all." Ilara simply shifted the tray to one hand and smoothed the fabric of her skirt with the other, her face blank. Brenda's narrow eyes did not move. From behind the marble bar, a young bartender named Leo, known for his slicked back hair and knowing grin, chimed in. "First night on the late shift, huh?" He was trying to catch her in a mistake, trying to make her part of his casual camaraderie, but Ilara did not indulge him. She stepped away, her shoes barely whispering on the plush carpet. A highly important American guest, the diplomatic envoy Mr. Sterling, waved her over. His face was flushed, and the Rolex on his wrist gleamed like a warning. "Wine," he demanded, not looking at her. She poured steadily. He glanced up, frowning. "I don't want clumsy staff around the table. Get someone else." His voice carried, and several heads turned to look at her. Ilara's jaw tightened, but she merely nodded, stepping back into the periphery. The air in the room seemed to cool, thick with shared judgment. Ilara stood by the wall, tray steady, observing the scene. She saw the calculating glances, the fake smiles, the quiet way people measured each other's worth. She had grown up amidst this scrutiny, but in those days she had been a child on the other side of the velvet rope, not the server holding the tray. A sudden, jarring clink of metal made her turn. Mr. Thorne, a tall financier with a silk tie and a particularly smug grin, had deliberately knocked his fork to the floor. He pointed at the silver utensil. "Pick it up," he said, loud enough for his entire table to hear. "That's what you're here for, right?" The others at the table chuckled, focusing their eyes on Ilara. She set her tray down, knelt, and retrieved the fork with fluid, practiced movement. As she stood, Mr. Thorne leaned back, savoring the moment. "Careful now. Don't trip. Wouldn't want to ruin that carpet." The laughter grew sharp and cutting. Ilara placed the fork gently back on the table, her face utterly calm. Her eyes met Mr. Thorne's for a brief, unwavering moment, a look that communicated nothing of anger, only quiet endurance, before she stepped back, restoring her distance. The main doors swung open once more, and Mr. Kim, the Korean magnate, walked in. He was an older man, perhaps 60. His face carved with the austere patience of massive responsibility. His suit was deceptively simple, yet impeccably tailored, and his presence was palpably heavier than anyone else's. He offered a slight, formal bow and greeted the room in clear Korean. Then, without transition, he launched into an extended rhythmic statement, packed with precise, high-level business terminology. Mergers, long-term assets, liability timelines, and fiscal projections. The American executives and investors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Their faces were blank masks of confusion. One leaned toward his neighbor, whispering, "What's he saying?" The tension in the Grand Summit ballroom became almost unbearable as the silence stretched and the magnate's frown deepened, his hands folding tightly in front of him. Ilara stood by the wall, motionless, her tray balanced. She understood every single word. She had spent years immersed in the language at the Hanyang Institute, studying, listening, and learning until the intricate structures of the language felt as natural as breathing. She could hear the subtle frustration building in the magnate's tone, the shift from formal presentation to pointed expectation. Brenda, the regional coordinator, spotted Ilara's attentive stillness and panicked. She moved quickly, hissing a warning. "Don't interfere. You're just the attendant." Ilara's eyes flicked briefly toward her manager, then immediately back to Mr. Kim. Her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on the tray. Leo, the bartender, seized the opportunity for another jibe. He leaned over, loud enough for nearby guests to overhear. "Think you understand Korean? Keep dreaming," he sneered, and a few of the American guests chuckled, nervously trying to break the tension. Ilara's chest tightened slightly, but her face remained serene. She took a slow, steady breath, her gaze locked on the magnate. An executive with platinum hair and a severe, tight smile, Ms. Harding, snapped, her tone sharp with irritation. "Does anyone here speak Korean?" She was scolding the entire room for their collective incompetence. The room was quiet. The magnate's frown intensified, his hands still tightly folded. A memory flashed through Ilara's mind. She was 19, sitting in a classroom at the Hanyang Institute. Her professor was nodding approvingly as she flawlessly translated a complex trade agreement. Her classmates had applauded, their faces bright with respect. Now, in this opulent room, she was nothing more than a pair of hands holding a tray. The contrast was a burning sensation, but she did not allow it to show. She adjusted her grip, her knuckles pale. Mr. Kim's voice grew sharper, his words now shifting to critical concepts of trust and commitment. Ilara caught every nuance, her mind racing to process the high-level negotiation points. Someone nearby coughed, muttering audibly. Someone get a real translator. The insults were still flying. An investment broker in a shimmering gold dress, her lipstick a shade too bright, Ms. Dubois, leaned loudly toward her companion. "Look at her," she whispered loudly, referring to Ilara. "Standing there like she's part of this. It's pathetic." The words sliced through the low hum of the room. Ilara's shoulders stiffened, but she did not turn. She reached for an empty glass on a nearby table, her movements slow and deliberate, her fingers brushing the cold stem. Ms. Dubois, emboldened by the attention, continued, her voice rising in pitch. "They should screen their staff better." Ilara set the glass down on her tray, the sudden clink sharp in the quiet. She glanced at Ms. Dubois, her steady gaze holding the broker's eye. The woman's words faltered instantly, her bright lipstick suddenly appearing garish under the ballroom lights. The moment had arrived. Ilara stepped forward, setting her tray softly onto a side table, the glassware making a final, soft clink. She bowed, deep and formal, the way she had learned decades ago in Seoul. Then she spoke. Her voice was clear, steady, and her Korean was utterly flawless. She repeated the magnate's exact words, translating them into precise, professional English. "Mr. Kim is proposing a joint venture with your firms focusing on sustainable energy. He is asking for a commitment to reduce emissions by 30% within 5 years. The Grand Summit ballroom went completely silent. Ilara's voice did not tremble. The magnate, Mr. Kim, paused. His eyes widened slightly. Then, for the very first time since entering the room, he smiled. The air shifted, heavy tension suddenly replaced by a quiet sense of awe, like a storm abruptly breaking. The American guests stared, their mouths slightly agape. Brenda, the regional coordinator, stammered, her voice high and nearly accusing. You really speak Korean." Ilara offered no reply to her manager. She simply turned back to the magnate, translating his next response with perfect rhythm and flow as he continued to speak. Mr. Sterling, the diplomatic envoy with the gleaming Rolex, muttered under his breath. "No way. That language is insanely hard." Leo, the bartender, forced a high, nervous laugh. "She probably memorized a few lines," he tried to claim. But Ilara's eyes did not waver. She continued, using advanced negotiation-level phrasing that settled over the room, silencing all remaining doubt. Ms. Harding, the executive with the diamond earrings, leaned forward, her sharp tone betraying her disbelief. "Where did you even learn that?" she demanded. "You don't look like you've been anywhere near Korea." The words landed like a physical slap, and the room held its breath, watching. Ilara paused, folding her hands briefly in front of her. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze steady, unwavering. "I learned," she said simply. Then she returned to the magnate, translating his next point regarding funding timelines. Ms. Harding's face flushed, and she sank back into her seat, utterly silenced. Mr. Kim chuckled, a warm, unexpected sound that filled the room. He addressed the stunned Americans directly. "She just conveyed my entire request with complete accuracy. Not a single word was missed," he stated. One guest nearly dropped his wine glass, the liquid sloshing precariously. Brenda's face went white, and her hands twisted together tightly. A staff member with tired eyes whispered to Leo, "She's not an ordinary attendant." Ilara bowed again, her expression serene, her hands perfectly steady. The tension had dissolved, replaced entirely by a quiet awe. But the room was not yet ready to fully surrender its class-based hierarchy. A man in a navy suit, his cufflinks flashing aggressively, the seasoned partner Mr. Everett, stood up. "This is a private meeting," he announced, pointing directly at Ilara. "Staff don't speak here. Get back to your job." His words were a blunt attempt to shove her back into her invisible box. Several guests nodded in agreement. Ilara did not move. She looked directly at him, her eyes clear, and offered only 2 words. "I'm helping," she said, her voice soft but undeniably firm. Mr. Everett blinked, his hand dropping. Mr. Kim raised his own hand, a gesture that instantly silenced the entire room, and then nodded explicitly at Ilara, signaling for her to continue. Mr. Everett sat down, his flashy cufflinks suddenly looking dull in the light. The magnate's next section detailed complex risk management strategies, which Ilara translated with the same steady, unwavering precision. Then, the woman with a pearl necklace and a clipped, suspicious voice interrupted Ilara directly. "You're not on the guest list," she accused, her eyes narrow. "How do we know you're not just making this up?" The accusation hung in the air, sharp and ugly. Ilara's hands momentarily stilled, but her face remained unchanged. She turned to the magnate, bowing slightly, and asked him in Korean, "Shall I clarify your terms for her?" Mr. Kim nodded instantly, his eyes bright with approval. Ilara spoke again, her English crisp and authoritative, dismantling the woman's doubt with a single, perfectly phrased sentence about international liability clauses. The pearls around the woman's neck seemed to tighten as she slumped back into her chair. A young man, the junior partner, Mr. Shaw, barely older than Ilara, piped up with a nervous, grating laugh. "Come on, this is a fluke," he stammered, his voice cracking slightly. "She's probably just parroting what she heard online." The room stirred, a few hesitant heads nodding in agreement. Ilara's eyes flicked to him, her expression unreadable. She reached into the apron pocket of her uniform, pulling out a small, worn notebook. Its pages were filled with meticulous, handwritten Korean characters, notes compiled over years of study. She held it up just long enough for every person in the room to clearly see the detailed precision of her work, then tucked it away. Mr. Shaw's laugh died, his expensive watch suddenly looking too large for his wrist. Yet, not everyone was ready to let go of their preconceived notions. A young American investor, the tech tycoon Mr. Jensen, lean and sharp-eyed, crossed his arms defiantly. "You're not an official interpreter," he stated, his voice loud, attempting to reclaim control of the shattered atmosphere. "Without diplomatic credentials, you're just staff." Brenda, the regional coordinator, nodded vigorously, her confidence attempting a shaky return. "Tomorrow you'll still be cleaning rooms," she insisted, the words meant to deeply wound. Ilara did not flinch. Instead, she offered a soft, unshaken smile. The magnate Mr. Kim took control. He opened his leather briefcase, the material creaking under his firm touch. He pulled out a thick envelope, his movements deliberate and focused. He spoke slowly, his English careful but profoundly clear. "She is my former student. Top of her class in international translation at the Hanyang Institute." He slid a photograph from the envelope and held it up. It showed Ilara, younger, radiant in a cap and gown, standing on a stage with her diploma. The room froze in a collective tableau of shock. Mr. Kim continued, his gaze firm. "She refused a corporate job because she wanted to experience ordinary life in the coastal metropolis." Mr. Jensen's arms dropped limply to his sides. Brenda's mouth opened, then slowly closed, every trace of contempt instantly replaced by stunned, absolute silence. Ilara finally straightened, raising her head for the first time to look around the room. Her eyes held no anger, no trace of triumph, only clarity. She saw them now, seeing her, truly seeing her for the first time. Brenda stumbled forward, trembling. I'm sorry," she managed, bowing awkwardly, a movement foreign to her. Leo, the bartender, stepped back, fixing his eyes on the floor. Mr. Sterling, the diplomatic envoy with the Rolex, cleared his throat, muttering to his neighbor, "We just made fools of ourselves in front of a hidden genius." The air in the room, once thick with judgment, was now heavy with genuine, reluctant respect. A new attendant, Chloe, a young woman with a nervous smile, passed by and, startled by the tension, dropped a stack of napkins near Ilara's feet. The room's eyes swiveled, waiting for Ilara to instinctively bend down, to revert to the role they had assigned her. Instead, she simply stepped back, her gaze steady, and said, "You've got this." Chloe flushed deeply, scrambling to pick up the stack herself. A guest whispered, "She's not even pretending anymore." Ilara's lips curved slightly, a small acknowledgement of the tectonic shift in the room's power structure. She was no longer invisible. Mr. Kim handed her a pen, gesturing toward a complex legal document. She signed it, her name flowing in the practiced, neat strokes of someone who understood commitment. Mr. Kim stepped to the center of the floor, his voice firm and commanding. "From now on, she will stand by me for all negotiations in the United States," he declared. He signed a document that formally appointed Ilara as his language and strategy consultant, the pen scratching loudly in the absolute quiet. Brenda's knees visibly wobbled, and she had to grab the edge of a table for support. The VIP guests, after a moment of paralysis, slowly rose, their applause starting hesitant and then growing into a steady, undeniable ovation. Ilara bowed slightly, her presence now the single most undeniable force in the Grand Summit Ballroom. The invisible attendant had, in a single night, become the most powerful person in the room. Mr. Everett, the seasoned partner with silver hair and a meticulously knotted tie, approached Ilara as the applause faded. "You should be grateful for this chance," he said, his tone utterly patronizing, as though bestowing profound wisdom. "Most people like you never get noticed." The room quieted, watching the interaction. Ilara tilted her head, meeting his eyes steadily. She picked up an empty glass from her tray, her movement smooth and practiced, and handed it to him. "I'm not most people," she said, her voice soft but ringing with clarity. She turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, holding the empty glass, his tie suddenly feeling too tight, his words utterly forgotten. The night did not end with the applause. It lingered, heavy and consequential. Ilara picked up her tray again, not because she was required to, but because it was hers to carry, a testament to the journey she had just completed. She moved through the room, pouring wine for guests who now actively avoided her eyes, unable to meet the gaze of the woman they had mocked hours earlier. Mr. Jensen, the tech tycoon who had challenged her credentials, stood alone by the bar, scrolling furiously on his phone. Later that night, an anonymous post went viral, detailing his firm's shady business practices. By morning, his stock had dipped sharply, and his name was trending for all the wrong reasons. Brenda, the regional coordinator, fared no better. The owner of the Zenith Plaza, a known acquaintance of the Korean magnate, received a quiet call regarding her behavior. Brenda was dismissed the next day, her name tag left forlornly on the desk. Leo, the bartender with the slicked-back hair, lost his late-night shifts after guests began complaining specifically about his attitude. Within a week, he was back to bussing tables at a local cafe. No one openly credited Ilara, but the quiet, sure truth of consequence was undeniable. Ilara did not stay to observe the full unfoldment. She finished her scheduled shift, clocked out, and walked into the cool air of the coastal metropolis night. The city hummed around her, taxis honking, lights flashing, people rushing past. She pulled her coat tight, her breath visible in the chilled air. A memory surfaced, unbidden. She was 16, standing in her family's grand estate. Her father's voice echoed in the opulent space, full of warning. "You'll never survive without us." She had looked at him, her hands steady even then, and replied, "I will." She had departed for Seoul the following year, carrying only a single suitcase and that singular promise to herself. A street musician played nearby, the notes of a saxophone drifting through the night air. The melody was familiar, a late-night sound she associated with Tokyo, after her demanding classes. She paused, letting the music wash over her. Felt like it was playing just for her. She dropped a few dollars into the worn velvet lining the musician's case and walked on, the notes fading behind her. She stopped at a corner store for a coffee to warm her hands. The cashier, an older woman with kind eyes, offered a sympathetic observation. "Rough night, honey." Ilara smiled, soft and completely genuine. "It was all right," she said, and meant it. She sipped the coffee, walking slowly, the city's pulse finally matching her own steady rhythm. She no longer needed to prove anything. Not to the Beaumonts, not to the Grand Summit ballroom full of billionaires, and crucially, not to herself. She had done that already, in every quiet step she took. The next day Mr. Kim's team called. They offered her a corner office, a senior title, and a salary that made her blink. She listened, the phone pressed to her ear, standing by the window of her small apartment. Outside, neighborhood children played, their laughter sharp and free. She thought about the service tray, the physical weight of it, the way it had kept her grounded. She thought about the hotel, the way it had hidden her, and how she had chosen to step out of that shadow on her own terms. "I'll think about it," she said, and hung up. Weeks later, she was back at the Zenith Plaza, but not in a gray uniform. She arrived as a guest, wearing a simple tailored black dress, her hair loose, her face clear and bare. The new coordinator, David, recognized her immediately and offered a nervous, deeply deferential smile. Ilara nodded, her eyes kind but maintaining a certain distance. She was there for a meeting. Mr. Kim had kept his word. She was his advisor now, her name clearly marked on the itinerary of every major negotiation. But she hadn't fundamentally changed. She still moved quietly, listened more than she spoke, and carried herself with the internal certainty of someone who knew her true weight. A young woman, a new attendant, approached Ilara with a tray of water. Her hands were shaking, her eyes wide with recognition. You're her, aren't you?" she whispered. Ilara tilted her head slightly, her smile soft. "Just here for the meeting," she confirmed, taking a glass. The attendant lingered, then blurted out, "You give me hope." Ilara paused, her finger still resting on the rim of the glass. She nodded, her eyes warm and understanding. The attendant walked away, her steps noticeably steadier than before. The room for this meeting was smaller, the stakes slightly lower, but the faces were fundamentally the same. Sharp, calculating and quick to judge. A junior partner, Mr. Shaw, the same one who had once smirked at her, leaned back, trying to project casual contempt. "You're the translator," he challenged, his tone dripping with implied dismissal. Ilara met his eyes, her gaze steady and level. "I'm the advisor," she corrected, her voice calm and authoritative. He blinked, then immediately looked away, silenced. The meeting proceeded. She spoke only when necessary, her words precise, her presence undeniable. Nobody questioned her again. Julian, Ilara's spouse, arrived late. He was quiet, much like her. His suit unflashy but impeccably sharp. He didn't need to speak. His name and reputation carried enough weight that when he walked in, the room subtly shifted. The junior partner who had just smirked froze, his pen stopping mid-scribble. Ms. Holloway, a board member who had once averted her eyes in contempt, looked away again, her face tight. Julian stood by Ilara, his hand brushing hers, a silent anchor. She had never needed rescuing, but his presence affirmed what words could not. She was seen, known, and valued. The meeting ended, and they left together, her hand securely in his. The hotel lobby gleamed. The same $1 million carpet she had once been warned not to spill on stretched before them. She glanced at it, a faint, small smile tugging at her lips. The world had profoundly shifted around her, yet she hadn't changed. She was still Ilara, still quiet, still steady. The only difference was that now, finally, they saw her. A week later, a photo surfaced online. Ilara standing beside the magnate mid-negotiation, her face calm and focused. The caption read, "The attendant who changed the game." Comments poured in, some kind, some dripping with bitterness. Ilara didn't read them. She was at a local cafe, eating fries with Julian, laughing at something he had said. The world could talk. She didn't need to listen. The final consequences kept coming, quiet but relentless. Mr. Shaw lost his sponsorship deal after a phone video of his contemptuous smirk went viral. Ms. Holloway, the board member, was dropped by her firm after internal emails, full of snide comments about staff, were leaked. They were not dramatic, theatrical falls, but the slow, inexorable grind of the truth catching up. Ilara didn't watch the news, didn't scroll the posts. She didn't need to. She kept walking, her steps sure, her intentional silence louder than any declaration. In the end, it was never about the room, the tray, or the words she translated. It was about the weight she chose to carry, the steadfast way she held it, and the dignity with which she ultimately set it down. She had been judged, mocked, and dismissed, but she had remained calm and unshaken. Her dignity was entirely her own, and that was the profound truth that lingered, heavier than any short-lived applause.